My ancestors came from here. They were taken from Africa in chains to power the greatest wealth-generating machine the world had ever known. During the slave trade, more than 12 million Africans were trafficked across the Atlantic to North and South America and the Caribbean. More than 2 million died en route. The Atlantic Ocean floor is one huge graveyard and a crime scene.
Hey, Sam, how you doing, buddy?
To tell this story, I've teamed up with DWP, Diving with a Purpose.
Good morning, good morning. Out here in the high seas. Ready to get wet, baby?
Some of the best underwater investigators in the world.
Chris, you ready?
All right, thanks for being here, Sam. I appreciate it.
All right, bro.
These divers are dedicated to bringing to light our ancestors' forgotten history.
We are raising the voices of people who didn't have a voice, whose voices were also enslaved.
We have to teach our young people where they came from. If we don't do it, no one will, ever.
We only talk about the ships that made it, but we never talk about the ones that didn't.
To understand what happened and why, I'm enlisting the help of award-winning journalists Simcha, Jacobovici, and Afua Hirsch. We traveled through the U.S. to tell the stories of those who resisted slavery.
What happens enables black people to do what they had wanted to do for so long, which was to fight slave owners.
Often making the dangerous journey to freedom in Canada.
You're talking about stories of resilience and a network of people who were striving to ensure the freedom of others.
It's the story not just of victims, but of heroes who fought for emancipation.
The all-black regiment began helping the slaves make their break for freedom.
They realized what was happening, that they should run, that they should take that one chance and go for it.
Those who held on to their culture and values and laid the foundation for future generations.
And we cannot sweep it under the rug. We got to bring it all out, make it plain, so the whole world can feel this.
We're in the shadow of Fort Amsterdam, which is the first fort where prisoners were held enslaved in this country.
When we talk about what became the slave trade, it couldn't have all transpired in peace. There had to be moments of uprising and people resisting.
Think about the people who trafficked Africans. There were so few of them compared to the number of people they were carrying. The audacity to think that a few men could subdue hundreds. And when they got to plantations, thousands of enslaved people, that required so much violence and fear.
It's amazing that they rise at all. You've got your wife, your children, your husband. It's very hard to resist.
You can either be whipped into complacency or fear, or you can be mad as hell when they open that hole and you come out of there. It's like, ah!
People were rising up, people were fighting back, people were making plans. Africans were not accepting this state of affairs. And I want to know how much resistance was going on, what forms did it take, and where.
In the United States, for many, resistance took the form of the Underground Railroad. On this mission, we're not looking for a slave ship. We're diving to find something that's pretty much the exact opposite. Ships of freedom. These were ships that took runaway slaves from America into Canada, from slavery to freedom.
So all of you are going to be diving in an area that is significant in terms of the Underground Railroad. There was a network of people and places that were significant in helping freedom seekers that were traveling along routes in order to escape plantations. Stories of resilience, people being able to make this journey from the South to the north, and it wasn't possible unless you had that network that was in place. The way that people communicated was mouth to ear. People would be able to describe a person in terms of where they lived at, what area they were going to, what name that they responded to describe a network of people who were striving to ensure the freedom of others.
So they may know that there's a house or a shelter 3 or 4 miles up the road, right? And then once they get there, they figure the rest of it out. I have no idea where I'm going or how I'm going to get there, but I'm going.
At the same time, there were bounty hunters tracking people based upon descriptions.
How do you even go about figuring out who to ask or where to go to?
When you're growing up on a plantation and you're not allowed to read, you learn how to read people. It would be an unspoken form of communication where they understood that sense of trust in one another. So my third great-grandfather, Josiah Henson, he was enslaved for 41 years of his life, and he took his 4 children and made this journey from Kentucky over 600 miles to western New York. 2 of his children were so small he had to carry them in a knapsack on his back. The entire journey. He was able to cross over into Canada in October of 1830.
Here's the waters, here's the terrain that your ancestors crossed so you can be here, so a lot of us can be here.
We'll try and do you and your ancestor justice. Saladin introduced us to historian John Polisek, an expert on sunken ships in the Great Lakes. John took us out to a very specific spot on Lake Michigan where a steamer called the Niagara sank.
We're out here on the site. This is where the Niagara is, about 50 feet down below. The Niagara was part of the Reed fleet, which is out of Erie, Pennsylvania. The Reed family were major abolitionists, and anytime you wanted to forward a fugitive slave, you could contact one of the Reed boats. Once they got on the boat, the fugitives would blend in as crew members until they had the opportunity to get to Detroit, get on the ferry, go across the mile to Windsor, Canada, and then they would be free.
Was the Niagara a fancy high-end boat?
Yes, it was. There were as many as 300 people who were bringing their livelihood, their whole families with them.
The fugitive slaves worked in the galley.
That's right, as waiters and other crew members. In 1856, when the Niagara was coming back to Chicago, a fire broke out and it sank.
Is there a loss of life on the Niagara?
Yes, more than 100 people.
Yeah, I'm going to weight check with an 80.
Pass that down to you when you jump in on it.
To dive these freezing waters, we're using these special dry suits to keep ourselves warm. Usually, people are looking for fancy items left by passengers, but we're going down to try to recover and find items that the runaway slaves were using to serve those passengers.
Pass that down to you when you jump in on it.
Can do, yeah, I might
jump in with it
in my hands, yeah.
What we're going to do today is that we're going to go down and we're going to look for the galley area behind the boiler, because we know that there are fugitive slaves working in the galley. So we can find items that they may have used, touched. And so it's always a chance we might find something that no one's seen before.
We go down the shot line to the ship's coordinates. Mallory brought with her a diagram of the wreckage so that we have a better chance of identifying the galley. And there's the wreck.
After 160 years, we can still see everything. The boiler that powered the engine, the giant paddle wheel. This was a ship that ferried runaways to freedom, and some of them may have been among the 100 or so that went down with the boat in 1856. But where's the galley where the fugitives worked? And then we saw something, a piece of a plate in the rubble.
So that plate, that's a direct connection to these slaves on board in the galley, right? Yes, that's a material, it's an item that connects you straight to these people who were working on these boats.
It was cold, it was dark, and a little eerie.
Thanks, Bob. Welcome back.
But not sad. It wasn't sad.
I know that in previous journeys,
people on that wreck made it to freedom. Somewhere out there, their descendants are still alive.
the Niagara didn't take the fugitives all the way to Canada. Close, but not all the way. Can we find a ship that went all the way? For the past few weeks, John has been searching for records of 19th century commercial ships that would sail across the Great Lakes while secretly ferrying enslaved Africans. What do you have?
I had a whole bunch of files that I was going through. The problem ends up being when you look at a Underground Railroad boat or a freedom boat, you got to figure out what happened to the boat. Some of them were abandoned, some of them burned, and what I'm just trying to do is narrow it down so that what we come up with is a boat that's still out there. And then I came across the schooner, which is a possibility. It's called the schooner Home. It was a vessel coming from Buffalo to Sandusky. However, it ran for a number of months unaccounted for. When we look at the papers here from the Port of Buffalo, they have arrivals and clearances to the Custom House. Right now, there's kind of a gap in its history. If it doesn't show up in the port for, say, 6 months, where was it going?
Do you suspect that because it was missing, that maybe it was smuggling fugitive Africans?
That's a good possibility. I mean, knowing that Sandusky was full of abolitionists.
So there's a possibility the Home was going to Canada?
You would say that, yes. James Nugent was the captain, an immigrant from Ireland. He lived in Sandusky, and it's a good possibility that he was an abolitionist simply because of the people he was running around with in Sandusky.
So we need to find out more about the captain then.
So why don't you check out Captain Nugent, and I'll check out the missing months of the Home's routes.
The struggle for freedom in the United States eventually led to the Civil War. More than 150 years ago, on this river, a daring military operation took place where African Americans fought for their freedom.
June 2nd, 1863. The Combahee River Raid was the largest freeing of enslaved people during the Civil War. And it's a story that particularly here in South Carolina that's not told very often.
In this raid, in one fell swoop, they freed over 700 people.
They had lived years of their lives, some of them 70, 65 years of their lives, praying and waking up every day, and I believe praying for freedom. And the day came.
I remember seeing a newspaper from the time where they focused on a former slave who came back as a Union soldier on one of the boats that took part in the raid. What exactly happened here?
This Federal Army raid had been carefully planned in advance. 2 gunboats came up this very river. 300 Union soldiers set out to liberate their brothers and sisters who were enslaved here. The liberators would have been a very unique sight, including escaped slaves from this area that became Union soldiers.
There are lots of heroes in that regiment, and they don't get their due at all.
It took a lot of will to decide to cross that red line.
These are brave people. They didn't have a military background. They were field hands. They worked these rice fields. Some of them had only been in the Army for a few weeks. The all-black regiment disembarked from the gunboats, and when it was time to strike, began torching the plantations and helping the slaves make their break for freedom.
The African Americans who were on the edges of the riverbanks realized what was happening, that this was their moment, that they should run, that they should take that one chance at freedom and go for it.
In the midst of the chaos, escaped slaves would be greeted by another shocking sight: the small but powerful African-American woman, Harriet Tubman. Harriet had escaped from slavery and became a famed conductor on the Underground Railroad. She risked her life numerous times to lead escaped slaves on a dangerous journey to freedom as far north as Canada. As the people were coming to get onto the boats, here she was, guiding them, helping them in all the confusion.
Now, your great-great-grandfather, he was one of those soldiers on this river fighting to liberate other African Americans.
Yeah. It's an amazing feeling. His name is Private Chedrick Mango. He was in Company E. I'm super proud of him. He made a decision to follow through and be a soldier and drill and work hard and be a liberator.
Founded 150 years ago, the Jubilee Singers were among the first to introduce African American music to a general audience.
We're here to find out the use of song in resistance, the use of song in liberation, and what it meant and how it worked.
Then we are referring to songs that people like Harriet Tubman used during the Underground Railroad system.
See that old star dressed in white, that's gonna trouble the water. The leader looks like an Israelite, that's gonna trouble the water.
They had different meanings to the songs with hidden meanings, or songs with double meanings, or coded songs. For example, the song Wade in the Water.
Wade in the water, that's gonna trouble the water.
Who would think that just saying wade in the water did not mean anything more than go through the water? But there was a reason they would use that song to give direction to the slaves as they traveled to the north. Because most times as they were running away, they were being chased by dogs. So the message was, go through the water, and then the dogs would not be able to follow you. Harriet Tubman used these songs to communicate with the slaves. For example, the song Go Down, Moses.
When Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go.
Moses, of course, was the one who was sent to lead the Israelites out of captivity. So Harriet Tubman, whenever she sang this song, was saying to the people, if you want to go into freedom, you can go with me.
The church played a key role when enslaved African Americans struggled for freedom.
They're figuring out ways to sing songs that are actually, very revolutionary in their meanings.
Right.
So are we able to identify where these songs came from?
We know that while the slaves were on the plantations, they would also go to church sometimes with their slave masters.
Really?
And I'm sure that's where they learned much of the stories from the Bible, but were able to relate the stories to their own situations and therefore created the songs.
Well, the Old Testament, in a way, is a playbook for liberation, trying to bring an explanation to living in an absurd situation. Because you got to admit, the last 400 years here have been quite absurd if your skin is brown. So you've always been trying to make sense out of it in your own way. We're Jim Crow babies, so when we grew up in Chattanooga, during the Civil Rights Movement, we began to hear the protest songs, the freedom singers. There was a black folk singing tradition also that we were exposed to.
Yeah, because we were musicians.
Yeah.
And we had different kinds of experiences that a lot of our contemporaries didn't have.
And a lot of those protest songs that were used then were basically spirituals. I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around.
Can you sing that for me?
I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, walking up to freedom land.
We're headed to Sandusky to find out if James Nugent, captain of the Home, was involved in ferrying runaway slaves to freedom. On the way, we're stopping in Cleveland to see firsthand one of the shelters that was used by freedom seekers in the Underground Railroad.
The building that we're standing in was built in 1838, and from its beginning, it's kind of had this social justice lean. St. John's was a stop on the Underground Railroad. In that time, the Underground Railroad had code names to describe the people and the places that they were traveling to keep secret, but also so that they would know where they were going next. And Cleveland was known as Station Hope. That was because if you made it to Station Hope, you most likely would make it to freedom. And where we think people hid is actually the bell tower. And that, at the time, was the tallest structure in the city, and so people who were fleeing slavery would hide in the bell tower, and they could look out to two places, the Cuyahoga River and to Lake Erie. Bodies of water. People could catch on to boats and then be taken to Lake Erie, where they would then hop on ships. So now where we're gonna go is up to the tower where people hid, and it's really dusty and rickety. So just be careful. Just make sure one person on the stairs at a time. So as you enter this space, this is the main frame of the tower. And as you can see, it's structurally being held up by some of these metal pieces, but also it weaves its way up. Ladders, a landing, and another ladder, and it just keeps going up. Often, when people traveled the Underground Railroad, it was at dawn or dusk. You didn't travel during the day because people would see you.
Step on the outside of the stairs, not in the center.
It's nice to have a friend who's a former firefighter. Oh, watch your head. There was a system in place to help these people make it to safety. And so with light signals from the river or the lake, people would know when it was safe to come down from the tower and either run or walk to get on a boat, or they would sometimes be put in the back of horse-drawn carriages and then covered up.
Kramer, there are these two rooms right here on either side, and they just go deep in, and it's really dark. You actually can't see inside, but this is probably where people would have hidden.
Yes. There's another one just in front of us, and another one up above.
Be careful, hold on to the rails, not the stairs.
We're just gonna go around here and take a look. Kramer, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So one of these rooms with a little bit of light is where you can imagine 1, 2, 3 people could have stayed. This is your last leg of the journey, and you're in this church steeple. And at night, you would probably come out and look through these windows here because the signal would have been a lantern, so you would have been able to see it at night. That signal might have come from the home.
We've made it to Sandusky, a small town on Lake Erie where 170 years ago, James Nugent, captain of the home, would regularly load his boat with cargo and head out to other destinations on the Great Lakes. But did he also ferry runaway slaves all the way to freedom? We're here to find out.
Sandusky was the Great Northern Depot and was also named Station Hope because of the strong possibility of reaching Canada from here without being captured. There are several houses that are still standing where active abolitionists would provide us shelter, food, clothing, a place to rest before it was time to come down to the waterfront and board the ships. There were a number of attorneys and judges that were in cahoots as abolitionists.
All rise.
There was the Honorable Rush R. Sloan. One time, there were 7 runaways in a group together. They were hounded by slave catchers, and Rush Sloan asked for documentation of these dark-skinned people. The slave catchers didn't have documentation. So Rush Sloan said, there's no reason for you to be held here. So a group of citizens rushed the runaways to the waterfront for transport to Canada.
While the slave catchers are still in the courtroom, they rushed them out.
Yes.
So what happened to Sloan because of that?
Well, later on, he was charged with aiding and abetting the runaways to get away. Was found guilty, was charged $3,000. There were court costs that were $1,000, and then the rest of it was equal the value of the runaways.
So he had to pay for the property that he let escape?
Yes. The other abolitionists in town contributed towards the amount that he was charged. Rush R. Sloan was a prominent figure in the Underground Railroad movement in Sandusky.
Our research speaks of a Captain Nugent who was involved here in Sandusky. Do you have any records or any knowledge about a Captain Nugent?
Yes. Look what Rush R. Sloan had to say about Captain Nugent.
These fugitives were the same night received from the small boat the next day by Captain James Nugent, a noble man now dead, then living at Sandusky, and secreted on board the vessel he commanded, these 7, and on the 2nd day after were safely landed in Canada.
Can you look at this? Here they list the names of the slaves that were
liberated, the 7.
Liberated in their escape, yeah. George Bracken, Emily Bracken, Ellen Bracken, Matilda Pritt, Thomas Pritt.
The 2 families.
Right, so we have the names of the people who were freed.
So not only did he ferry these 7 slaves, it's safe to assume that in 1848, when those missing months happened on the home, he was also ferrying fugitives. That's perfect sense.
We actually found out that Captain Nugent was an abolitionist.
100%. We even have the names of 7 people that he brought to Canada.
You've done your research on Captain Nugent, and I also got my part of the story. So the Empire Sandy is more or less a recreation of the home. It's a schooner sailing the Great Lakes.
So it gives us a visual of what it was actually taking place.
That's right. This is one of the areas that the home would have sailed through. And the reason for that is something that we found in the Sandusky newspaper. This is a 1848 copy of the Sandusky Clarion, which is the year that Captain Nugent was on the home. Down here, it says
Port of Sandusky.
Port of Sandusky, right.
Arrived June 8th, schooner home, Nugent. So it went to Sandusky.
You need to read a little bit more.
Nugent, Oswego. So what does this mean, John?
It was coming back from Oswego, New York.
Okay, so it's coming from New York to Sandusky, Ohio.
That's right. But in order to get to Oswego, it had to go through the Welland Canal, which is in Canada. The Welland Canal had been enlarged, and it allowed the home to go through it.
This is the period of time the home was missing.
The 4-month gap, everyone assumed it was just going back and forth to Buffalo. I'd like to show you now how Captain Nugent most probably took the runaways to freedom. We're just coming off of Lake Ontario.
So we're in Canada?
Yes, both sides are Canada. We're at one of the oldest sections, Lock 27. In 1 month, they'll put about 140 boats through it. So when you come here, you're 200 feet above Lake Ontario.
You gotta drop
and
down.
you have to drop down 27 locks. So it's time intensive. And this must have been the moment of truth for the fugitives. The boat is tied there, it comes to a certain level. You can walk off without too much of a problem.
At what point during the course of this journey do I finally get a chance to exhale and say, I've made it?
Just down the ways is the village of St. Catharines. And it had a number of fugitives who were there and had made a settlement. There were also a number of people there who were involved with their welfare. One of the men was Mr. Merritt, who's the one who actually designed the Welland Canal. These are all people who were part of the Fugitive Aid Society. So you ended up in St. Catharines, you built your life there. There are a number of people who settled there also. One of them was Harriet Tubman. She brought a number of people from the south to St. Catharines to live.
So the home went through this lock?
I would say so.
All the evidence points to the home being a freedom boat. Let's dive in pair of respects.
In 1858, several years after Captain Nugent ferried runaways to Canada, the home sank during a collision on Lake Michigan. In 1981, the home was discovered and cataloged among the hundreds of wrecks in Lake Michigan. This dive will be the first time that a Great Lakes wreck can be said with certainty to be a freedom boat.
There's a spare bottle of juice inside.
On this foggy and windy day, it's going to be hard to make a dive to 175 feet to a shipwreck.
Bring that bottle of 50%.
Or I have a drop line, I can have it hanging, right?
And the deeper you go, you're committed to the water for a longer period of time. So we have to watch topside conditions more carefully on deeper dives.
So as the deep divers will be going down with trimix gases and special gear, Josh and I will be free diving from above to watch out for any signals of distress.
After we surfaced, I tried to envision this space and this time, trying to figure out what somebody would be feeling having traveled 300, 400, 500 miles on foot to get to this final point. people carrying their kids for hundreds of miles to make it to a point like Sandusky in hiding, waiting for an opportunity to get on a boat to get this far. And still the possibility that somebody can come and snatch me and drag me all the way back into slavery. And then the rare instance of numbers of them who decided, I'm going back to help others get free. And doing it a number of times. Some of them going back and getting caught and killed. Their sacrifice, their drive is what made it possible for me to be here.
Got it.
Our team tracked down this poem by a gentleman by the name of Joshua Simpson. He was at the forefront of gathering the slaves here and ferrying them over to Canada for freedom. I'm on my way to Canada, that cold and distant land. The dire effects of slavery I can no longer stand. Farewell, old master. Don't come after me. I'm on my way to Canada, where colored men are free.
In contrast to Canada, slavery was enmeshed in the culture and economy of the Confederate South. In America, the struggle to end slavery culminated in a bloody civil war.
So what's the significance of this place? There's a spooky feel to it.
Yeah, I mean...
That's not very scientific.
No, but a lot of people died here. There were Confederate forces up on that ridge firing down on the Union soldiers. And you could see here the Confederates have the high ground. And so they are able to pick Union soldiers off as they're trying to cross this little bridge. And I think the choice to make this charge cost a lot of people their lives.
When it comes to the struggle for abolition in the United States, this battle was the turning point.
We're standing in a Union-only cemetery for soldiers that were killed in the bloodiest day in U.S. history. On September 17, 1862, 3,650 people died here. Another 2,000 died in the days, months, weeks that followed the battle.
Almost 6,000 soldiers, Union and Southerners.
That's correct.
Died in this one battle. How did this battle impact African Americans' liberation?
The Battle of Antietam had a secret underpinning, a secret agenda. Lincoln had hidden away in his desk a document. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation would elevate the war, would make it about a new, higher purpose, make it not just about reunification, but also about the ending of slavery.
So Lincoln has drafted this proclamation, but he drafts it in 1862 when things are going really badly for the Union Army. And his advisors say, basically, like, we like this idea, like, we're kind of in favor of this, but it's going to look really bad and desperate if you do it when the war is going so poorly for us. And so after the victory here at Antietam, Lincoln decides, I have the victory I need, and I'm going to issue the proclamation.
Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, one of the things it did was it offered a first-time invitation for African-American soldiers to join the Union Army. They did so in droves. By the end of the Civil War, about 10% of the soldiers who fought on the Union side would be African Americans.
What happens at Antietam enables black people to do what they had wanted to do for so long, which was to fight slave owners. This is a chance for me to fight for freedom for people who look like me all across the country.
So is it fair to say Lincoln freed the slaves?
Not quite. Lincoln was responding to black people's own actions to free themselves. Starting in May 1861, before a lot of major battles have taken place, black people are running to Fort Monroe in Virginia, seeking out the Union Army and demanding that the Army should make them free. And so what Lincoln does is open a door through which they could travel to freedom. The story of emancipation is just wrong if it's told without African Americans actually claiming their own freedom.
The story of emancipation during the Civil War is a mosaic of individual acts by those who helped others to freedom at great risk to themselves. One story stands out. It took place here in Charleston Harbor, a great terminus of the transatlantic slave trade.
It's the spot where almost half of all the enslaved Africans who came to America throughout the course of the entire transatlantic slave trade, where they took their first steps. Right here. It's called Gadsden's Wharf. It was the largest wharf in the colonies. It was the spot where more enslaved Africans landed and were sold than any other place in the country. It became really the epicenter of slavery. There's a greater than 99% probability that all living African Americans have at least one relative who landed here.
And your great-great-grandfather, he was once a slave here?
Yeah. My great-great-grandfather, his name was Robert Smalls. He is commonly known as one of the first heroes of the Civil War. He was born on April 5th, 1839 in Beaufort, South Carolina. Eventually became a laborer on a boat called the Planter, and over the years, because he had ability, he ended up becoming the pilot of that boat. When the Civil War broke out, he got his family and the crew and their families and head out. There was a federal blockade just outside the mouth of the harbor, and he knew that if he could get there, that he'd be free. Robert put on the top hat and the long coat of a Confederate captain. He knew all the passcodes, blowing the whistle. There were about 5 forts that he had to sail past, including the most dangerous and the biggest here, Fort Sumter, where the Civil War began. They had to sail past the range of the cannons in Fort Sumter, and so they got a bit further down till they were beyond the range, and they quickly lowered the Confederate flag, and they were free.
Because of his bravery and the capture of an enemy vessel for the Union, Smalls became a national hero. With the money he was awarded for delivering the Planter, he eventually bought the southern home he grew up in as a slave.
This is at 511 Prince Street.
It's actually everything I would have imagined, a southern house.
Yeah, it's a beautiful home.
Generations of your family, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, going back to my great-great-great-grandmother. So this is it. This is the bedroom. After the war, he's here. Apparently hears a knock on the door, opens the door, and there's Jane Bold McKee. Jane was the wife of his master's former master, and she was ill, mentally ill, physically ill, and thought she was coming home to her house, thought that she was gonna resume life in the way that she had lived it. And Robert embraced her, brought her in, and took care of her for the remaining, months of her life. He allowed her to live in the master bedroom, and they catered to her. He was owned by this woman. He was treated as a piece of property, but yet he had the humanity in him to bring her in and to care for her.
Robert Smalls became a congressman and would later be remembered as the father of public education in the United States.
With emancipation came the chance for freed Africans to build their own unique communities and cultures. This community was started by the Africans who were on the last illegal slave ship to arrive in America, the Clotilde. 5 years after they were brought here, the end of the Civil War set them free, and they started the only African-run town in America. Grammy Award-winning musician Rhiannon Giddens and I are here with Joelle Billingsley, who brought us here to see the monument honoring her great-great-grandfather, Kazula, one of the founders of Africatown.
Kazula happens to be the one we know the most about, right? Just because he lived longer and he shared his story in a way that allowed for us to learn about it now. Wow.
My grandmother was born in 18-something, so her mother was a slave. So she could talk to me about what that was, that forms us in interesting kinds of ways. I mean, people always talk about slavery like it's ancient history.
Yeah.
It's not. And lasted a long time.
Yeah. In Africatown, they grew their own food. They established their own community based on what they did in their homeland, based on their traditions. And so as you sort of move through the decades, you'll see that that community at one time, when it was thriving, had everything you needed. You didn't have to go anywhere in order to go to the grocery store, to see a doctor, to be educated, or even have some entertainment. Everything you needed to live was right here in the community. And so when you talk to people, they have so much pride in what it used to be. One time it was 12,000 people. Now it's 2,000. Now we're trying to revive Africatown. We have a place called Kazula, named after my great-great-great-grandfather.
So why are you the first black person I ever seen play a banjo?
That's the question.
That is the question, you know, because it was like, I grew up seeing white people play the banjo and kind of going, oh, that's cool, but it's not part of my culture. And then I found there are some recordings of the black players of this music. And then as I started to dig, and like, this used to be a huge tradition. It was an enormous tradition all across, not just the South, but all across the country. So I know the banjo as this. Metal strings, metallic instrument, often played bluegrass style. And then I learned that the banjo was an African-American instrument, so it looked more like this. It was known by everybody as a black instrument. The emblem of being black was the banjo. Then you have a change in the 1820s and 30s, and that's when white folk started going, that's really cool, I would like to play that. So you have white entertainers picking up the banjo. The reason why we don't talk about this shift is because the white folks playing this banjo would have been doing it in blackface. This entire industry becomes the blackface minstrel show. It's the most popular form of entertainment for like over 60 years.
Are you saying that what we know as bluegrass today actually began with African Americans?
100%. This is exactly what we're saying.
Yeah.
Wow.
So are you saying the original do-si-dos was an African-American thing?
So way back when you have nothing but dances as entertainment and you have plantations, the musicians for these balls are African-American.
Almost always.
And so they are forced to learn European dances, European music, and then they're themselves mixing it. The thing that sets apart American square dancing and country dances from Europe is the calling. You don't have callers, and that's the thing that you think, dozy-do, and round and round and around you go, and grab your partner, and up and down you swing that saddle gal around, that stuff. These are the innovations that make this music uniquely American, are African-American.
Reflecting back on their enslaved past, gave our people then, as now, the material to create a rich cultural legacy.
I've got a body dark and strong. I was young, but not for long. You took me to bed, a little girl. Left me in a woman's world. I've done a lot of research about time of slavery, and I was looking at advertisements where people were putting ads in the paper to sell people. And I saw one in particular, it was for a young woman who was for sale. And at the end of the ad, it said that she has with her a 9-month-old baby who is at the purchaser's option. And I don't know, those words just really stuck with me, and thinking about her in particular. I've got a baby, but shall I keep him? 'Twill come the day when I'll be weeping. But how can I love him any less? This little babe upon my breast. You can take my body, you can take my bones, you can take my blood, but not my soul. You can take my body, take my bones, you can take my blood, but not my soul. You have this lineage here. You have this connection historically to that last ship that was sent over here. You know where you come from. I don't know necessarily where my family comes from in the same way, but musically, I know my lineage. There's more than one way to be connected to who we are as a community. It's not just blood.
In the gathering place right behind Kazula, the Africatown community assembles to commemorate their ancestors.
Family and friends, in the presence of God, we come to pour our libation in memory of our faith and blood.
Growing up not far from here, I would never have imagined the traditional African ceremony survived in Alabama.
When we pour libation, we awaken the ancestors. We talk to them. We're going to pour forth water to symbolize the richness of our inheritance, to symbolize how nourishing is the earth, which has fed our lives and all our previous generations. In response to each pouring, I would like for you to respond, Ashe, which means so be it. Repeat after me, Ashe. Ashe. For many years, those Africans from the Clotilde held rituals and rites and buried their kin in this sacred space. If you would, call out the names of those who you have buried. Kazula. Ashe. Hupoli Allen. Ashe. Osai Kibi. Ashe.
We've been diving for sunken slave ships all around the world, with up to 1,000 still on the ocean floor and just a handful identified. Our journey is far from over. But in the midst of this, we got the chance to meet a very special person who heard about our work. The legendary civil rights leader, Congressman John Lewis.
How many times have you been arrested?
During the 60s, I got arrested 40 times for sitting in at lunch counters in restaurants, going on the Freedom Ride. We were arrested, we were jailed, we were beaten, we were left bloody, left unconscious, just by sitting in places that only white people were supposed to sit.
You remember the first time you were arrested?
I remember the first time I was arrested. Right. I can never, ever forget it. I felt free.
Free?
I felt liberated because my mother and my father and grandparents have said, stay out of trouble, don't get in trouble. And I got in trouble. What I call good trouble, necessary trouble.
I didn't quite understand my own history, and I have so many questions that each time I go diving, some of it gets answered. We dove and saw relics, remnants of the chaos, of the brutality, of the abuse. Sometimes it's just too much, but we have to tell this story.
All of the places that we've been, you can see the beauty of it and the wonder of it. You see these islands or shorelines. When we were in Suriname, we're standing on the shoreline of the most beautiful scenery that you ever wanted to see, but to know that 680 Africans were murdered within a couple of hundred yards of the shoreline, I'm conflicted all the time.
I understand very well what you're saying. And we cannot sweep it under the rug. We got to bring it all out, make it plain. And we have an obligation, a mission, a mandate to do just that, so the whole world can feel this. Keep the faith. Don't give up.
No, sir.
Never that.
As it turned out, it was John Lewis's final year. He passed away not long after. But meeting him inspired us and made us even more determined to continue our work, to bring up our history from the ocean floor.